Hello everybody, welcome to this virtual open day. My name is Dr. Dan Hale. I'm an assistant professor at the university in the psychology department, and I'm going to be talking about the university and also the department a little bit, and in passing I'll be discussing some of my own work as well, so hopefully you'll get a flavor of what's happening here and why you might want to consider coming to Heriot-Watt to study. So let's start by introducing the university. It's actually a very old university. You wouldn't necessarily know it by looking at our campus because that's relatively new. But the university started nearly 200 years ago as I think it was called a mechanics institute. It was basically for working men. It was exclusively men who were working possibly as a mechanic in a trade to get education about science and technology. Obviously things have changed a lot since then in many ways, but some pretty historic roots for the university. We have campuses in Edinburgh, of course, but also in Malaysia and Dubai. Malaysia is our newest campus, and in fact the Dubai campus is in the process of moving at the moment. So actually this has practical implications perhaps for your decision to come study here, because the fact that we have campuses in these two other locations means that you can do a really seamless transition if you wanted to go on exchange. In fact, it's not really an exchange at all because you're staying at the same university, you're taking the exact same course. We, the teaching team, work together across these institutions, so it really is the same assessments, the same course, and everything. So if you were to go to one of these institutions or these campuses and come back, you really wouldn't have missed a beat. So it's a really nice way to get some international experience. There are other ways to do that at Heriot-Watt. There's some more typical traditional exchanges with other universities that we offer. But you can, as I said, get some international experience without leaving Heriot-Watt at all. There are a number of ranking tables. There's probably so many that it does get a little bit confusing. So all I'll say on this for now is that Heriot-Watt is doing really well and improving in these tables all the time. So for one ranking is the World University Rankings, and Heriot-Watt is about 300th. So certainly there are universities higher up in the ratings, obviously, but considering the number of universities in the world, that's a pretty solid ranking. And as I say, that's something that we're continually working on. We're ranked very highly within Scotland as well. So there might be lots of reasons that you want to maybe study in Edinburgh, stay close to home, or indeed travel to Edinburgh or to one of our other campuses. And Heriot-Watt is a really good choice for you if you're in that situation. So that's all I'll say about the university for now, and I want to get into psychology. And the fact that you're listening to this means you probably already have a bit of an idea about psychology and what we do. But I want to talk a bit about psychology's past, its present, and its future, very, very briefly, obviously. So in the past, or one of these classic studies in social psychology you can see over on the left, the Asch conformity study, found that you could influence the way people responded to a question. The question was about how long this line was that you can see in the left of the image, and they found that people could be relatively easily influenced by what other people said. So if everyone said it was line B, other people in the experiment, or at least people were led to believe that these were just other people in the experiment just like them. In fact, they were Confederates. They were in on the trick. But what they would say influenced what a participant in the study would say was the longest line. So that's quite, and there's a lot of reasons why people might be influenced, but that was quite an interesting finding, and continues to be. And of course we know that our social environment is important for how we behave. So it's not really fair to call that psychology's past, because that's still of interest to us. But moving into the type of research that's happening now. You could point to outgroup face recognition, right? So the finding that we're not as good at recognizing faces when those faces are of people outside our in-group or a group that we identify with, which of course you can define in many different ways. So this has implications for lots of things, including potentially racism and discrimination, and but lots of areas, right? So again, that's another example of social psychology and the types of impact and research that we as psychologists are trying to have. You can also talk about emotions in robots, and this is something that people within our department are looking at. How do we depict emotions in robots? Again, or how do we interact with robots in ways that might be useful to us as humans? Again, this is a relevant question given the role that robots might have in our lives as we move forward. So you could call this the future, but actually it's also the present. And these are important questions that have practical implications. So again, I couldn't possibly outline all the current challenges in psychology or current topics of interest, but we could talk about behavior and climate change. How do we get people to believe in climate change and take steps to maybe change it or to behave in ways that reduce climate change? A particular interest of mine is behavior and health. Again, how do we get people to behave in ways that are good for them? It's not always so easy. It's certainly not as easy as telling them about the risks of a particular behavior. That does not, in all cases, or in many cases, change that behavior. We have a growing aging population that has implications for health and well-being. And now is maybe an interesting time to be talking about politics and the biases we have and the ways that we consume maybe information relating to politics, to media, how we look at, for example, presidential candidates and judge them and the biases that we bring. It's not a passive experience, right? We bring our own sort of baggage to these things and biases, and we're not always as objective as maybe even we think that we are. So these are the types of things, and obviously that's a whirlwind tour that psychologists are interested in, but it goes well beyond these particular topics because really psychologists are interested in people. So anything that has anything to do with people has some relevance to psychology, and you could tell that that's incredibly broad. So now you're an expert in psychology, so let's take a little quiz. Okay, and here let's start with a pretty, well, I nearly gave away the answer. I'll just start by reading out the question. We use only 10% of our brain. I'll give you a moment to decide what you think about that. Is that true or false? That's false. That's a myth, and I nearly gave it away before I read the question out. So you're using every part of your brain all the time. We know this from looking at people in, brain scanning machines. We can see that there's activity in all parts of your brain all the time. And actually, your brain is using more energy, given its weight, than actually the rest of your body. So no, you need basically your whole brain for anything that you might do. And I'm not quite sure where this myth came from. There's an interesting Wikipedia page all about this myth and how it's been debunked. So if you're interested in this, go have a look. That's kind of interesting. All right, speaking of, or continuing on with, brain localization and specialization, damage on the left side of the brain is often associated with problems in speech and language in general. Is this true or false? This is true. We often talk about, brain centers, or this is the speech center. That's a bit of an oversimplification. Speech is, there's lots of parts of your brain involved in that. So it's probably true that if you had damage to the right side of your brain, you might also have some problems with speech and language. But the left side is sort of dominant in that particular process. So if you get damage to the left side of your brain, it might have an influence on these processes, speech and language, more than maybe other things, or more than if you had a brain injury to the other side of your brain. So some evidence of specialization of your of parts of your brain. This is getting closer to my area of interest. Money can't buy happiness. Is that true or false? Sounds more like a philosophical question, doesn't it? Well, this is false. Sort of, mostly. So money can buy happiness, depending on how you define happiness, and it certainly can until you're quite well off, let's put it that way. So you can see here this graph is showing us that, um, you know, more or less, the more money you make, the less negative emotion you feel. So that maybe is one measure of happiness, right? But I should say that, we're looking at -1%, so it's not a huge impact here, right? That makes it clear that there's a lot of other factors. And this sort of marginal gain, the amount that it changes your experience of negative emotions, comes close to zero once you're at about, well, the equivalent of, let's say, 157,000 pounds per year family income. That's quite a lot of money, at least from my perspective. So you need to be earning quite a lot for any, raises to have no influence at all on your happiness or your negative emotions, right? So I would say that the answer is largely that, yeah, money does have an influence on your happiness, at least up to a point, even if it is small. All right, the last question of the day: cannabis use is associated with poor mental health. Is that true or false? Well, that's true, and that's very emphatically true. But be careful about how I worded that question, because I worded it in a particular specific way. There is clear associations there. So people who consume cannabis are more likely to have, mental health problems. Um, but that doesn't necessarily mean that cannabis use causes mental health problems. It may be, for example, that people with poor mental health use cannabis as a way of coping, a way of self uh, medicating. It could be that other factors are involved, like, poverty might be bad for your mental health, and people who are deprived might gravitate towards substance use, for example, or education might be another one. So it's probably a pretty complex causal path. It's definitely true, or the evidence is pretty clear that there's an association, but that doesn't tell us anything about why. It doesn't tell us that cannabis use causes mental health problems, right? And this is an area that I'm interested in as a psychologist, but it's a complicated area that we haven't entirely disentangled yet. Okay, so let's get into psychology at Heriot-Watt universities and some of the things that we offer and why you might want to study here. So first of all, we're accredited by the British Psychological Society. So you need a degree that's accredited by this organization to have a career as a professional psychologist. Actually, this isn't unique to Heriot-Watt, and nearly all psychology courses offered by reputable universities are BPS accredited. So it's something to look out for, but most are accredited. It is important, but most programs have it. We have supportive staff. We have a high staff-student ratio, right? So you're likely to get more personalized attention. And we have a pretty useful, I think, personal tutor system. Particularly, it's useful for, first years and maybe second years. As you enter the university, there's a lot of different support available, a lot of processes, and your personal tutor is a named staff member from within your department who is there to help you out and is the first port of call. So if you have any issues, you can always drop an email to your personal tutor, who will point you in the direction of other help, or try to help you themselves. So you're definitely well supported at the university within the department. We have really excellent facilities. We have experimental labs, things like, a driving simulator, if that was something that you were interested in looking at, and testing people and their driving abilities, or manipulating certain factors that might be of interest to you. Things like brain scanning equipment to see what's happening at that level of neurology, and lots of other experimental labs, lots of fancy equipment that you can use. And in fact, if you come to Heriot-Watt University, you will conduct original research. A lot of people use, I say, simple questionnaires, but you can get pretty much as fancy as you want and use some of this equipment for your purposes. We have a flexible program structure, so you can tailor your studies, tailor your time at the university, and I'm going to talk through that in a minute. We also have, speaking of flexibility and tailoring your time here to your interests and your aspirations, we have the Voluntary Research Assistant Scheme, which is a way that people, students, can involve themselves in research that's going on at the university, within the department, or even if you wanted to work in industry as sort of an intern, that's something that we can facilitate. So you can get a lot of experience that's particular to your interests and will hopefully serve you well when you leave, when it comes time to leave the university. So I want to talk you through our sort of three main research areas. I already said that psychology is hugely broad, and so are these areas, and they overlap. You probably know that, or you can tell that I maybe fit best in that middle one, lifespan health and well-being. I'm interested in health and health promotion, but my work could probably fit within some of those other ones. So these are really, really broad areas, but they do give an indication of our department and the types of areas that we are interested in. And to follow on from that point, our psychology lecturers are all active in research. So we're, you could say, at the cutting edge of our fields, or at least trying to be. So we're active and we're doing stuff within these areas. So we're not just lecturers, but we're also active researchers, which obviously has an influence on our lecturing. And in terms of research impact and quality, again, we're moving up in the world. So we've climbed up 16 places in the last research exercise framework, which basically means that we're getting assessed as better in terms of the research that we're putting out there. And it's Heriot-Watt's most improved unit of assessment. So that just shows that things are good and they're improving. And we're also trying to have an impact. And I think I already made that clear when I talked about some of the areas that we're working on, right? So important topics that have relevance for the real world, mental health or health behaviors, aging, language. These are things that have practical implications beyond the universities that we work in. So I want to talk you through now the programs that we offer. And there are two, and they're a little bit different from one another, but they share some similarities as well. So there's the BSc in psychology, and then the BSc psychology with management. So I'll take a second to talk you through both of these options. The entry requirements are much the same for both of them. I appreciate that for some people, it's not clear from this whether or not they meet the requirements. It might be very clear from this, but if it's not, my email will be at the end of this presentation. And feel free to drop me an email, or anyone at the university would be happy to try to help you out and see whether you meet these entry requirements. So you can see that you can enter at level 1, which is basically first year, or level 2, depending on the qualifications that you have. Level 2 would be going directly into second year. Good. So this is our BSc psychology without management, sort of straight psychology, or whatever you want to call it. And this gives you an idea of what you'd be studying. Introduction to psychology, that shouldn't surprise you. We're learning about research methods in these years, of course, and a few particular topics in psychology. And then you have space for quite a few options, and so we can offer options from languages, biology, and management. So you can really tailor your first 2 years as you see fit across these areas. When we get into the later years, year 3 and 4, you still have options, but the options are psychology focused, right? So you can pick what areas of psychology interest you and take and take those options. So hopefully you have, by the time you've reached third year, you have a bit of an idea of the types of psychology that you're interested in and maybe the ones that you're not so interested. Again, it's a very broad area. All right, and with management, much the same, except that instead of those options, you have these management courses. So actually, in theory, you could be in the regular psychology program and take those management options, and on paper, it would look exactly the same, the courses that you were taking. You still have room for languages, biology, and other management options there. So not vastly different, but you can just see that there's that emphasis on management, and you have to take some of those options related to that. And similar in third and fourth year, so you have psychology options as you do in the other program, but also you have some management options, so you can fill up those slots with a mixture of psychology and management. So what would a timetable sort of look like? Well, you'd have 4, or whatever you want to call them. We call them courses, but you could call them modules per semester. And you have 2 semesters, so that adds up to 8 courses per year. Basically, you have to pass them all if you want to get into your next year. The pass level is 40%. In terms of the amount of time you spend when you're taking this program, it's probably a good idea to think of it in terms of a full-time job, right? So 35 or 40 hours a week. So there's 2 hours of teaching and then 1 hour of tutorial, and then you have time outside of that time when you can be independently working on your studying or working on your assignments and that sort of thing. So where might you end up after a degree at Heriot-Watt? Well, you might end up working in psychology, which probably shouldn't surprise you to hear that. There's lots of areas of psychology you can see in that figure on the right. But actually most of people don't end up working within psychology. I've already said many times psychology is very broad, and so it shouldn't surprise you to hear that it has implications for fields that are considered outside of psychology, things like business, marketing, teaching, maybe non-academic research. You'll definitely develop some research skills, support work for any number of populations, right? So psychology doesn't, I don't want to say limit. It doesn't limit you. I don't want to make the case that other degrees limit you, but you probably have less choice in what you do with, say, an engineering degree than you do, say, a psychology one. If you get an engineering degree, you're probably going to be some sort of engineer. You get a psychology degree, it doesn't mean you're going to be a psychologist. There's lots of areas that you could work in with that sort of degree. Forgive me if I'm being unfair to engineering students. But yeah, there's lots of places that you might end up going. Many of our graduates go on to further study either within Heriot-Watt University. We offer a business psychology master's, but often graduates go on to master's programs at other universities as well. And I've touched on this at the beginning, but you have lots of options for going abroad during your time at Heriot-Watt. So you can go away for a year or a semester anytime up to the second semester and third year. Just because of your dissertation, you have to sort of stick with your home campus after then, but that gives you plenty of opportunity to go abroad and experience some international flavor for your degree. I've already mentioned Malaysia and Dubai campuses, and there are exchange agreements with lots of universities all over the world, so plenty of options there. I also talked about our labs, so you can see some of these, some brain scanning going on here, people using the computer lab, maybe reaction time experiments. As I said, you will be doing a dissertation, and there's lots of options for picking the topic that you're interested in. We have particular expertise, but we endeavor to be able to supervise any type of project, and hopefully we have the equipment, the resources that you need to do it. I already talked about the voluntary research assistant scheme, and here's some examples of the types of places that you might work. Working with us on our projects, working with charities, working outside the university. So I guess that's one of my main points, is that here at Heriot-Watt, you do have a lot of flexibility to pick the the program that you're interested in, the courses that you're interested in, what you do your own research on, which is a big part of your degree, and there's lots of opportunities outside of your courses to tailor your experience as you see fit to whatever your interests are. Another example of that is the Psychology Society, who are a very friendly bunch and are always up to something or other. In fact, they've just set up a scheme whereby older undergraduates, third and fourth years, can support new entry students. So a nice support network there. You know, you can. It's nice to socialize within your department, but that's also a way of getting support, right? So that's another way that you can tailor your experience as you see fit. I'll wrap up there. I hope that was useful. If you have any questions, as I mentioned earlier, my email address is there. I'm happy to hear from anyone, and I will certainly do my best to answer any questions that you have. Thanks for your time today.